What is good, NIO family? It's Rey-Jay back with another video. And in this one, I wanted to break down what's happening with NIO, Tesla, SPY, and a couple of other tickers. And break down what's happening with the economic calendar moving forward, what's going on with some big news involving NIO, and what you should be watching for as time progresses. But before I begin the devil's information, before I get into any more details, let me just mention a couple of things. I am personally not a financial planner, so take nothing I say as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out the Moomoo link, which is down below and in the description. If you sign up for Moomoo and deposit $100, you're guaranteed 7 free stocks. And the offer ends very soon in just about 5 days from now. Anyways, for NIO, we had this very, very big red bar for today, down over 8%. Unfortunately, NIO has a double top leg formation. There is more downside potential in the stock, in my opinion, because we had some very, very bad news that came out. Many different countries are threatening to increase tariffs on China when it comes to EV imports. This is including the USA and also many European countries. And that is not the best of news for companies like NIO, which are very, very fixated on expanding to Europe. So not the best of news. We have a big gap to fill below on NIO, and there is a risk of it potentially doing so if we lose the support right over here. So I'll be talking more about this moving forward, but I also want to talk about the overall market, what's happening for us. So tomorrow is going to be Friday, May 24th, 2024. At 9:35 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, we have Waller from the Fed giving a speech. At 10 a.m., we have the Michigan Consumer Sentiment data, the 5-year inflationary expectations, and a bunch of data like that coming out. And besides that, there's not really a whole lot else that's coming out. So very, very minor data. But in this case, guys, I don't think that the data is as impactful as what it's been like for like CPI reports or even FOMC. It's not really that crazy. I think that the market's just making its move based off liquidity and what these big players are doing. And this data right now is just kind of like noise in the way. I would kind of describe it that way. So I would say to watch price action. I think that that's what you should prioritize over data for now, at least for the remainder of the week. Should you do this every single day? The answer is not necessarily, because there are days when things do shift and we tend to see big differences in the markets. So with that being said, guys, I want to make it very clear that with these big differences, make sure you look for some data. It could cause some volatility here and there, but prioritize price action, at least for the time being, for the remainder of this week. Also, right now, the fear and greed index is currently quite neutral. We're actually getting closer to this left side, getting very closer to being completely neutral. I think that we could actually get a little bit more selling, but before the market makes an attempt to bounce, if we hold a particular support, which I'll call out. Market momentum is also quite greedy. It's kind of shifting a little bit, so we'll see if that shifts. And then the puts and call option positioning is actually going back upwards a little bit as more puts are being bought in the markets, more shorts are piling in again. The VIX is also trying to bounce temporarily, but this is not a confirmation break or anything like that. We'll have to see if that ends up happening. When it comes to other pieces of data, we just had earnings come out. Nvidia did very well with earnings, by the way. That's what helped the market actually push in the morning. SPY gapped up to a new all-time high. So did the QQQ. So did Nvidia. Nvidia held up very, very well, as it's very strong. They beat on EPS and revenue, had good guidance for this current quarter. Not to mention, a potential buyback and a nice stock split. So good for Nvidia. It helped the market pump temporarily, but the market could not hold those levels, didn't sustain them, and came back down. For today, we had TD Bank announce earnings and also Ross. So Ross did relatively well for earnings. Just want to call this out. They beat EPS with $1.46. They also had a slight beat over revenue expectations with $4.86 billion in revenue for the quarter, which is not bad whatsoever. Guidance was also pretty good from what I was looking at. They're anticipating a 2 to 3% increase in sales for the second quarter and better than expected EPS. For the full fiscal 2025, EPS is also looking a little bit close to expectations. Very, very close, not perfect. A little bit below. I would say very, very close. If anything, wasn't really enough to hurt them, because for the second quarter, their projections are good. This quarter, earnings were pretty good, and that's why the share price is still up despite what they said about the fiscal year. Now, as far as NIO goes, NIO is still once again building NIO House in Europe. It's set to open its doors in Amsterdam, and that's despite the fact that we're getting some bad news. So, they're continuing their European expansion despite the fact that the EU tariffs are still being threatened, and that's part of why the share price was actually dipping a bit. Many people are saying it doesn't make sense for them to be, this fixated on Europe when tariffs continue to increase and this and that. And there's a lot of uncertainty about this, so that is something very important right now. There's also a lot of geopolitical issues getting in the way. I wanted to just talk about that. I'm not going to go into the full details. I don't really want to get too political, but with that happening, that's not the best of news for NIO as a whole. And that's part of why we actually saw quite a bit of selling. So geopolitics, not to mention, tariff threats, are kind of getting in the way for NIO. You guys can see right over here, European tariff threats did contribute to why NIO was down. Not to mention the fact that the whole market came down as a whole, so that also contributed. NIO is once again continuing to do what it has to do. But with these fears of the European tariffs, that was used as an excuse to dump the price. That was actually very beneficial for shorts. On top of this, NIO is now expected to report earnings just about 2 weeks from now. We'll see what they end up announcing. That's going to be the next big catalyst after they give us the next deliveries data. So I can't wait to see what else is said during then. Besides that, guys, volume is at about 80 million, very close to that. So we got high volume selling, not the best of signs. And JP Morgan still has a neutral rating for NIO. These ratings could change once we get more updates soon. Price price ratio is dipping a bit because we're losing some strength. And in terms of seasonality, we're only green about 53% of the time on Fridays. So I'm still a bit concerned that there is more downside potential despite how we could move tomorrow. So, and this is what it is, guys. I just have to be very unbiased in doing my analysis. The daily looks kind of weak. I do think that NIO is at risk of kind of underperforming for a bit. We have this big gap to fill, so I'm going to be watching to see if that ends up being the case. Now, 4.8 is a very important level because we had historical resistance here becoming support. So we'll see how NIO ends up performing from there. Looking at the 1 hour time frame, NIO looks like it's going to try to rebound a bit tomorrow. As long as we hold above 4.8, I could see it. Could try to make its way back up to 4.9 or so, then eventually reject and continue to fall. And if that ends up being the case, we're going to be dipping even lower. So I'll have to wait and see how things end up going from here. I want to make it very clear we have this big gap over here as well because of all the European news. So I think tomorrow look for a little rebound on NIO to a key Fibonacci retracement area at this 4.9 zone. 4.9 to 5 could be retested before it tries to reject and continue lower. But there is, excuse me, there is a risk of this dipping even more, in my personal opinion, because of how weak it's looking on the daily. Look for a little rebound and a rejection, and there might be a bit more downside, but this could be a, excuse me, this could be a big buying opportunity for the month of June once we get their deliveries numbers and earnings. So I can't wait to see what the future holds. Despite that, Tesla's also looking a little bit weak right now, especially on our 4 hour time frame. Looking at the way technicals look, Tesla's also continuing to dip right over here. So we'll see how things end up moving, at least for this moving forward. As far as Tesla goes, we're continuing to see this thing fall, and I can't wait to see what other developments come. But looking at the way things are moving, I just wanted to say that Tesla is still in a very, very critical place. Now, we have this very, very important support right over here around this key area. Let me just show you where this area happens to be. But moving forward, I just want to make it very clear that Tesla is, holding the support at 173 to 172. We do love to bounce off this area, but there could be a little bit more selling before we get that bounce. So watch this 173 support. We could dip a little bit more to the 176 before we see a little rebound attempt back up to about 176, and then a lot of sideways chop right in this area. So we're entering a very, very important chop zone. We will see how well Tesla holds up over here. The momentum is still bearish, but we're at some key support between 172 and 173. So I wouldn't be surprised if Tesla kind of dips a bit, rebounds temporarily, gets a retest of like 175 or so, 176.5, before it just continues to trade sideways. I find that to be very probable for tomorrow. For SPY, I'm seeing essentially the same thing. SPY has a big gap to fill. I'm actually eyeing this on the daily chart. So I think going into tomorrow, we might pop in the morning, then eventually come down to fill this gap. There might be a little bit more selling coming to about 523 or so. Then we have to bounce off 523 for this to actually remain bullish. If we lose 523 to 522 and we just continue to fall and we don't really get enough buyers, then yes, we could continue to sink for quite some time. So I'll be watching that very, very carefully. SPY could dip a little bit more, but watch to see if he holds support for that bounce. I think there's more downside coming before an attempt to do so. For the QQQ, is the same thing essentially. We have this gap over here all the way down 446. It is possible we actually dip a little bit more. We could get a big drop on the QQQ tomorrow. This held up a little bit better than SPY, but we could come down to fill this gap before we get the bounce. So there might be more downside coming to the QQQ than that of SPY. I just want to make that very clear. Watch 450. If we lose that, then look for the gap fill at 446 before we try to bounce. Do I think the QQQ could bounce later? Yes, it could, but we need to give this a little bit more time. For Aapl, it's the same thing essentially. Apple's actually dipping, looking very bearish on the daily. We're testing previous resistance, becoming support at 186.8. If we lose that, I'll be looking for the gap fill at 185 before it tries to bounce. So it could be a little bit more downside coming. With that being said, guys, Coinbase, it's looking a little bit weak right now. We're at support at 218. If we lose this, it could dip a little bit more. Could be looking for a test of 214 before it tries to bounce again. Amazon's trying to base at a 180. If we hold this, we could get a little rebound to 182. Might see a lot of sideways price action unless we lose 180, so I'll be watching that carefully. For Meta is trying to hold 462. If we hold it, we're going to be looking for a nice little rebound. If we lose it, then we're going to be dipping down to fill this gap all the way down to 450. In my opinion, watch 462. Let's see if we try to bounce off that. We might retested tomorrow, so I'll be watching for that. For the people interested in AMC and GameStop, AMC is actually down quite a bit, at least for now. We'll be watching to see if this thing ends up losing its support. We have this support right here near our daily 50 EMA at 4 and also 4.24. Might be a little dip before it tries to bounce, so watch for that. And then also for GameStop, we're coming down to fill our gap at the 17 area. We failed to hold 20, so look for a little bit more downside before we try to bounce off 16.6 to 17. That's where our 200 EMA happens to be. And we'll see how things go. Anyways, that is it for the video. So sadly for NIO, there is likely going to be more downside coming in looking at the daily time frame. Let me just hide these just to make this more clear. We might rebound a bit towards 4.9 to 5 and then reject and eventually start sinking. And I could see a risk of more downside moving forward. With that being said, I just want to say I really appreciate every single one of you. Please have an absolutely incredible rest of the day. Hope you guys take care, and I'll see you guys tomorrow for the next one. Thank you and peace out.